Okay, so for my presentation, I'm going to be talking about ethnic and border disputes in interwar Germany. This refers to the time after World War I and before World War II. As a student of history, I think this is super important. It has a lot of implications for modern events, and hopefully we can apply some of the lessons learned here to conflicts like those between Russia and Ukraine, and also what's happening with Israel, Iran, and Palestine. Jumping right in, this is Germany before World War I. So notice that Germany is an empire, Russia an empire, Austro-Hungary is also an empire. These are not democracies or republics, they are monarchies with emperors. So that's really important to notice. Also, World War I was the first modern war. It's the first instance of mechanized weapons like chemical weapons, machine guns, tanks, things like this. So this is war on a much broader scale than what has ever happened before and much more aggressive. This is a map in 1917. Now, Germany, Austro-Hungary, and Ottoman Empire are allies. They're trying to expand and to gain economic sectors, to gain territory, things like this. So if you ever hear someone say anything about the Eastern Front or the Western Front, this is what they're referring to in World War I. So as you can see, before the war, during the war, there is massive territorial gain. Of course, Germany did lose the war. The Treaty of Versailles was established by the League of Nations, which is kind of the 1919 equivalent of the United Nations. This was the Allied powers like America, Britain, France that were really in charge of this. Two super important things. The guilt clause basically said Germany is the responsible party for World War I. They caused this. This is on them. Is that true? Yes, it is true, but it's also more complicated than that. And the approach Versailles took with the guilt clause was extremely aggressive. They took back the territorial gains made by Germany, which, again, before the war, during the war, these were massive territorial gains, and they took that back from Germany. Occupation, Allied forces were occupying Germany in various locations following the war. Demilitarization, reparations. The reparations were intended for Germany to pay back the damages they inflicted during the war, but these were massive. Had the reparations really stuck around, which they didn't, Germany would have been broke for generations, so that means people in poverty for many years. The second important thing about Versailles is it was operating on the principle of self-determination, that basically the lands, the territorial gains by Germany, which they lost, were established as these countries. The self-determination aspect is that the principle was that they would have the power to control their own destiny in terms of their own government, their own borders, their own land claims, things like this. It's a really great idea. It's a very American idea. It's much harder to put into practice. But as you can see, this is what they did. So the land that Germany lost was changed into these countries. They were all founded in 1919. This is why self-determination is more complicated. If you look at this map, which is just the former Austro-Hungarian Empire but can be applied to the rest of Europe, you see the ethnic splits. So the red portion are ethnic Germans. It's really hard to establish borders when ethnicity and culture is so complicated that caused a lot of the conflicts that led to World War II. But what I want to focus on is how much of the German ethnic population is outside of Germany. In all of Europe, this is about 30 million people. It's 1/3 of the German population that is no longer in Germany due to the reclamation of the territory gained during the war. So I'll play devil's advocate. I'm not excusing Germany. I just need to say that this was a very bad time to be German. If you think about the reparations, which contributed to hyperinflation, this is also the Depression era. So economically, everyone in Germany is struggling a lot more than the nations around them. They're humiliated by the terms of Versailles. A lot of people have lost loved ones in the war, and now all of the gains they made in the war have been revoked and they're being punished for it. So it's starting to feel, if you're German, you're feeling like all of the effort put into the war was in vain, and you're ostracized, you're humiliated. There's a lot of bitterness in Germany at this time, which Germany at the time, because the monarchy fell, the empire fell, coming out of the war, the institute in charge was the Weimar Republic. It was the first democracy in Germany. They didn't have former experience as a democratic society, so they didn't really know what they were doing, and they had so many problems that arguably Weimar Germany couldn't deal with the internal conflicts and external conflicts going on because there were so many problems. What they focused on as a government institution was primarily two things. First, denying the guilt clause of Versailles. The theory went that if the Weimar Republic could prove that Germany was not guilty of World War I, they could be free of the consequences, the reparations, the borders, the occupation, all of this. So they really focused on trying to remove the idea of guilt. They did this through propaganda, many things, and then the propagation of nationalistic rhetoric. This is really important. They really pushed the idea of German unity. Basically, Germans stand with Germans. They started kind of to push the idea of superiority, of defending the homeland, of things like this. Now, this graph, it shows the rise of the Nazi or the National Socialist Party, but what I want you to see here is that this is also a rise in nationalism. This was something that the National Socialists took from the Weimar Republic and ran with, and this kind of shows how much that resonated with the nation at this time. Again, Germany is embittered, they're dealing with the consequences of the war, and when the National Socialists, the Nazis come in, Hitler especially comes in and starts advocating for Germany, that really resonated with people. So nationalism in Germany at this time skyrocketed. As a result, several things happened. Hitler was really advocating for the demonization of Versailles. This is propaganda that kind of depicts that, like to break the shackles of Versailles. Ethnic superiority. The National Socialists really pushed this. It was very appealing at the time, if you were German, you're being berated by other nations, you're being bullied by other nations, and then Hitler, the Nazis come along and say, no, actually we are superior. They start pushing this idea, and then they blame everything that's going on in Germany, all of the lack of unity, the conflicts, everything, they blame on outgroups. So anyone who is not German, they perceive as the problem, the cause of World War I, the cause of the situation they're in now. So they take all of the guilt off themselves, place it on outgroups, otherwise known as Jews, communists, Poles, Ukrainians. You know the story. This is how they got to that, by putting the blame on people like the Jews. Obviously lots of other people too, but this is how Germany radicalized and moved to what they called the final solution. So I wanted to incorporate this just to see the human effect that these things have. You say 6 million Jews, and sometimes it's hard to relate that to faces. But it's important to study this because what happened in Germany can happen today. Like this says, ethnic and border disputes are still prevalent in modern times. Look at what's happening in Europe now with Russia. Look at what's happening in the Middle East. These things can happen again. This is how ethnically and nationally Germany radicalized. It can happen today. It can happen here. It is happening in other places. So this is why it's important to study things like this and my sources. So yeah, thank you.